Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. I'm here with Alex Traiman, the CEO of JNS. Alex, you're back from the States. How was your trip?
It was a good trip, important trip, and we're finding that we have JNS supporters really everywhere. And people are reading it. People are noticing why JNS is different than the other sources out there, and people really appreciating the hard work that we've been putting in, especially since October 7th.
Great to know. Unfortunately, with the October 7th attacks, but more and more people are counting on JNS for their news. So thanks for tuning in today. And the top story this week here in Israel actually is coming out of the United States. And on Friday, President Biden took about 15 minutes or so to talk about the crisis in Gaza. And I'll start right there, noticing what he said. Crisis in Gaza. He didn't say Israel. He didn't mention what we have gone through. At least not initially. He didn't say what we've gone through October 7th. He talked about the situation, the headline, the situation in Gaza. I mean, what do you make just of the headline, crisis in Gaza?
I mean, there's so many different components of this, and I would urge, actually, I know that Carolyn Glick did an in-depth, almost line-by-line analysis of the Biden speech, and we're not going to do that. But look, you're now several months before an election in the United States. And people are looking around the globe, and they see that the Russia-Ukraine war continues unabated, that Israel-Gaza, it's just as intense as ever. And as we'll talk about later, the situation with Israel and Hezbollah and southern Lebanon is also heating up. And it looks like the president of the United States is not in control. So what he's done is to try to take, and I guess we'll talk a little bit more about it, but he basically took a Hamas position, negotiated with Egypt and Qatar, who are both have proven themselves to be Hamas collaborators throughout this entire process, and then flipped the script and put the pressure on Israel in order to solve this crisis in Gaza, as you say.
So let's play just a short clip of President Joe Biden from this past Friday.
Israel has offered a comprehensive new proposal. It's a roadmap to an enduring ceasefire and the release of all hostages.
Alex, a question that a lot of people are asking, and I saw Ambassador David Traiman, former U.S. ambassador to Israel, ask, is what peace deal is the president talking about? Ambassador Friedman said that this is actually Hamas's peace deal, and the president referred to it as Israel's peace deal. So, and Prime Minister Netanyahu, we'll talk about it. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that, he doesn't back the wording of President Joe Biden. So is this a Hamas deal? Is this an Israel deal? I mean, who initiated this latest negotiation here?
We saw the same thing happen several weeks back, where basically Hamas accepted its own terms of a deal and then announced that it was accepting the Israeli proposal, right? And this was also coordinated. It's the same thing taking place, and this is just the next level. First, Hamas says we accepted the deal, and then that puts pressure on Israel to accept the deal that Hamas accepts, although it was Hamas's version of the deal to begin with. So Hamas accepted their own proposal, and it didn't work. Israel didn't bite. So now what Biden is doing is taking the same Hamas proposal, or the updated Hamas proposal, said that it's been negotiated with the Hamas collaborators, Egypt and Qatar, and then announcing it to the world in order to not have it be leaked to the press, but rather that he's announcing it from the White House, and that he hopes will put more pressure on Israel to accept the deal. If then now the president of the United States is saying, we all agree that this is the deal, and he also is putting this proposal in the mouths of the Israelis. He essentially said it's the Israeli proposal, when Israel is saying it's not the Israeli proposal. At the same time, Israel's in a bit of a pickle. They're in a predicament because they can't come out and say, after Biden says this is Israel's proposal, they can't say, no, President Biden, this isn't our proposal. They have to say, look, there are aspects of this proposal that we're generally okay with, but the idea that we're going to stop before Hamas is removed as military power, we've said the entire time that we can't agree to any proposal that leaves Hamas in power militarily or politically in the Gaza Strip.
But that being said, and I can't read every single word here, but this is a three-pointed proposal. Number one, phase one, ceasefire for 6 weeks. Phase 2, Hamas and Israel, with the exchange of some of the hostages. Phase 2 is a total ceasefire with exchange of more hostages. And then the third phase is a major reconstruction plan for Gaza. And I mean, the whole thing is preposterous and absolutely ridiculous. And as you said, nowhere in here does it say that Hamas would be eliminated. According to the president, Hamas has been decimated enough that Israel can once again rely on some sort of international actor to take over and count on, and Israel would have to count on them for its security. And every time Israel's done that, it's only come back to bite us. So again, without the complete elimination of Hamas, what are we talking about?
And
here?
Israel cannot even agree to phase 1, right? Because a 6-week truce, whatever that is, means the fighting is over. There's very little way that you could see a situation in which Israel would be able to resume its fighting if it stops even for 6 weeks. And then these other phases, they're basically contingent on whether or not Hamas lives up to its commitments. And this is a false paradigm at the very foundation. There's no more Hamas living up to its commitments. Israel's saying Hamas is finished. They're no longer a negotiating party, okay? Yes, we can negotiate to get back hostages, maybe by releasing some terrorists, because Hamas, whether we like it or not, whether they exist as a military or a political power, they are holding hostages. So there can be a negotiation on exchange of hostages for prisoners, but not over anything else, because they are no longer an entity that is in charge of the Gaza Strip.
And I have a problem with Biden's wording. Actually, he doesn't refer to them as terrorists in Israeli prisons. He says that they are just prisoners, as if they, got caught stealing apples or whatnot, which is absolutely ridiculous. At the same time, Biden takes a swipe at Israel's coalition, specifically those on the right, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, essentially saying that they want to continue the war indefinitely, prioritize occupation, and they don't want to bring back the hostages. He's basically calling them out, and that's absolutely not true. They have different strategies on how to get back the hostages, but he is actually making it look like that they just want to continue a war forever, aren't willing to bring back the hostages, and this is a slap in the face to them when it comes to talking to the families of the hostages. Biden is making Netanyahu's coalition partners look like real extremists who don't want peace, and they do want peace. They just have a different strategy.
So this has been the real art of the Biden administration strategy, which is to replace Netanyahu. Okay, and together they're working with the Israeli left wing to do that, and that includes even members of Netanyahu's own coalition, which right now includes Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, and it also has started to include a member of Netanyahu's own Likud party, Yoav Gallant, who's the defense minister, who's effectively, you will see in the next election, he will be a defector from Likud. He will not be running with the Likud in the next list. So you have even a defector inside now Benjamin Netanyahu's own party, and he happens to be one of the most powerful players in Israel right now as the defense minister. And the reason why he's so powerful is because, unlike the United States, the prime minister is not the commander-in-chief of the military. That role is partially in the hands of the defense minister, partially in the hands of the chief of staff of the army. It's not Netanyahu. So the Biden administration working now with Gallant, working with Gantz to try to collapse Netanyahu's government, and the way they do that is by trying to position it as being a right-wing extremist government with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. But what Biden said about Smotrich and Ben-Gvir is absolutely not true, as you alluded to, because they don't want this fight to go on forever. Quite the opposite. They want the war to be over faster. They want Hamas to be defeated as quickly as possible. And if you look at the steps that the Biden administration has taken, they have slammed the brakes continuously on Netanyahu in this operation. We're seeing now every day inside Rafah justification for going into Rafah. The IDF is finding they're finding tunnel shafts. They found bodies. They have there's been Qassam rockets fired at Israeli cities from Rafah, and Israel's taken out some of those caches of rockets and weapons. So every single day, Israel's been justified to go into Rafah, and yet the Biden administration prevented Israel from going into Rafah for weeks on end. The Rafah operation should have been long over, and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have been pushing Netanyahu constantly to continue going and get the war over as fast as possible.
Yeah, and ironically, Biden says he wants a ceasefire now. He wants it all to end, but yet he's not willing to give Israel the flexibility to go in and do exactly what it has to do to make the war end, and that is defeat Hamas. And Netanyahu's other two terms, again, defeating Hamas, getting back the hostages, and making sure Gaza no longer poses as a threat. He said that all along.
Even that concept is another false paradigm. Israel's not going for a ceasefire, okay? How many times between 2005, when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip, have Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, started up firing rockets at Israel, attacking Israel, making tunnels, penetrating into Israeli land across the Gazan border? It's happened numerous times even before October 7th. And every time the IDF responds in a limited way, and then we get to a ceasefire. And the ceasefire is violated. There can be no more, there's not going to be another ceasefire because that concept suggests or presents the idea that Hamas is on the other side of that ceasefire. Israel's not playing for a ceasefire. Israel's playing for a paradigm shift in which Hamas is not in charge of the Gaza Strip any longer, not as a political entity and not as a military entity.
I agree 100%, but opposition leader Yair Lapid actually says that he's willing to give Netanyahu a safety net if he accepts this proposal, if he accepts the proposed deal. Getting back the hostages now, taking those 3 steps, 6-week ceasefire, whatnot. He's essentially saying he's willing to live with Hamas in power if the hostages come back. He's even willing to go above and beyond what he's done over the last several years in terms of trying to dethrone Netanyahu and say he's going to keep him in power as long as Netanyahu takes this deal.
I mean, that's a fool's errand, because basically when you hear what Ben Gvir and Smotrich have said, they said if you accept this deal, we're leaving the coalition. Now, this is something that they have repeated over and over since this conflict began. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that have bought into the messaging that Ben Gvir and Smotrich are extremists. They have actually kept Netanyahu glued on mission throughout this entire process. If they weren't there threatening Netanyahu's coalition, Netanyahu probably would have slowed up, and we probably would have gotten to some kind of a ceasefire that would have left Hamas in power. It's Ben Gvir and Smotrich that are the ones that keep pressing Netanyahu to go after Hamas completely. So what is Lapid saying? He's saying, get rid of Smotrich and Ben Gvir, kick them out of the coalition, and I will come into your government in order to prop it up, in order to allow for this ceasefire to take place. But what's going to happen? We know that it's Yair Lapid. He was the one leading the anti-Netanyahu protests from the first minute. So all he does is he comes into the government, he gets rid of Netanyahu's staunch allies on the right, the ones that have actually kept Netanyahu in power, and then they get the hostages back. He claims victory as the one that propped up the government, and the next day he turns around and says, I'm leaving. And that's how he crashes the government. So Netanyahu is not that foolish. He understands the political system, the way it works, the coalition system better than anybody, and he plays that system better than any other politician in Israel. So Netanyahu is going to ignore what Yair Lapid has said, and he's not going to jettison Ben Gvir and Smotrich. And what that means is that he's going to have to go after Hamas all the way to the finish line, because that's the only way that he can keep his right-wing coalition in power.
And as all this is going on, we have a lot of chatter from the other side of the pond, namely the United States. Those who are calling on President Biden to be clear. One of them is Senator Lindsey Graham, saying that he's insisting that President Biden needs to be crystal clear that the ceasefire proposal does not prevent Israel from continuing military operations to destroy Hamas and to ensure they have no role in the future. And also, at the same time, Prime Minister Netanyahu just accepted an invite. I don't know when it's going to be, what the date is, an invite from Congress to come speak. The last time he did this was in 2015 when Netanyahu gave that famous speech to a joint session there, speaking out against the Iranian deal. And now he's been invited again. So while Israel might be isolated in places like the Maldives, and we can talk about that, and in Spain and in Norway and in Ireland and in these other countries, but we still have 100% the backing of the American people as they are represented in Congress by those who are willing to come out and actually invite the prime minister. Some are calling him a war criminal. And at the same time, the U.S. Congress is backing the prime minister, other than maybe the squad or whatnot. But the majority of the American people, I think, is the most important thing to note, are in complete partnership with the state of Israel, knowing that Israel is just the first step and that Hamas wants to destroy not only Israel, but the entire Western world. Netanyahu is speaking at Congress.
It's important to go back now and look at what happened when Netanyahu marched into Congress in 2015. Remember, then President Obama was advancing the JCPOA, the first Iran nuclear deal. Netanyahu saw it as an existential threat to the state of Israel and realized that he wasn't going to prevent Obama from signing that deal and needed to take and make the case to the American people themselves as to why this is a bad deal. Netanyahu's action going to the Congress angered Obama to no end. And I don't believe that Obama and Netanyahu were best of friends before that speech took place. But for Obama, it was a red line. And certainly the relationship between Obama and Netanyahu, which maybe was cordial beforehand, really soured afterwards. And many people, opponents of Netanyahu here in Israel, will blame Netanyahu for souring that relationship with the Democrats. But what did that speech do? It didn't prevent Obama from not signing the deal, but the next president that came into office, Donald Trump, pulled out of that deal immediately. Why? Because Netanyahu clearly made the case as to why this was a bad deal. President Trump understood that, and he made it a foreign policy priority to get out of the deal. The speech did something else. As that speech was being made, countries around the world, and including in the Middle East, were watching that speech. And almost immediately after that speech, or even during that speech, according to some of the stories that I've heard, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, they picked up the phone and they understood from that moment that Israel will stand up for the security not only of the state of Israel, but for the entire region, because Iran poses a threat to the entire region, and only Israel will stand up for the security of the entire region, even if a U.S. administration is undermining security in the Middle East. And it was, in many ways, that speech was a foundational element of the signing of the Abraham Accords. So you can look back now and say, yes, did we sour relations with a president at the time, Obama, that was destabilizing the Middle East and making Israel less safe as a country and posing an existential threat to the future and the security of the state of Israel? Sure. But a lot of positives came out of that speech. And once you understand that context, now you can understand why Netanyahu feels that it's important to go again to the Congress and make the case of the state of Israel before the American people. And you said it correctly, Josh. The American people, by and large, really support the state of Israel. We've seen it in poll after poll. There was a very important Harvard-Harris poll that came out recently that supports that. And also the Republican Party, led by the Speaker of the Congress, Mike Johnson, senators like Lindsey Graham, and also Republican candidate for president Donald Trump, have a very different view about what American policy should be towards Israel and the Middle East. And you have the Saudis watching, you have the rest of the region watching. So I think that Netanyahu feels that this speech is very important opportunity for him at a time when, as you correctly noted, Israel's been much maligned, has been isolated to a large extent. This is Netanyahu's opportunity to make Israel's case to the world after October 7th.
Yeah, you mentioned the other countries who picked up their phone, the UAE, Bahrain, and whatnot, and I'm sure the Saudis would have done the same under the Trump administration. And even though there are rumors now that the Saudis are willing to normalize relations with Israel at this juncture, I don't think that's going to happen under a weak Biden administration. This is the Middle East. They value strength, and the Biden administration is not showing strength. They're showing weakness, concessions, appeasement, and they don't play that game in Saudi Arabia.
Well, there have been discussions that Saudis were on an imminent path to normalizing relations with the state of Israel. That even I had heard that potentially a signing could have taken place in November 2023. And this was exactly the reason why Hamas launched their operation in October in order to prevent the signing of this normalization. And this would be a game-changing normalization because Saudi Arabia is the seat of Saudi Islam in the region. They're one of the strongest Muslim powers here. And if they would sign normalization with Israel, it would really be the next step in the end of the greater Arab-Israeli conflict. And Hamas, led by Iran, basically, who's also in coordination with Hezbollah. I mean, they arranged this in Beirut in advance of October 7th. Everybody knew this was going to take place, and we've seen Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran itself, all firing at Israel since October 7th to scuttle the Saudi normalization. Looking at how the United States under the Biden administration has dealt with Israel in the Middle East since October 7th, how they've been pressuring Israel, how they've been talking to the Iranians, how they've been considering going back into some other kind of Iran nuclear deal, there is no way that the Saudis would give the Biden administration ahead of an election some kind of like major diplomatic achievement in order to show back to the American people. They don't believe that a second Biden administration would improve security for them or for the entire region, and there's no way that they're going to give them some kind of major accomplishment at this stage. They are watching to see what Israel will do. They expect Israel to defeat Hamas, defeat them all the way. If Israel does what it's supposed to do, at some point after November, maybe you'll see Israel and Saudi Arabia finally sign that normalization agreement.
So speaking of what Israel should do, what Israel's supposed to do, just a little bit of a Gaza war update here. Israel is taking part in operations against the Hamas terrorist regime there in Rafah along the border between Gaza and Egypt. Israeli forces eliminating key Hamas terrorists, finding the tunnel shafts, taking them out, finding all these caches of weapons, taking them out as well. At the same time, Israel just wrapped up another operation in the Jabalia neighborhood that's more north in Gaza. Again, we've talked about this before. Hamas perhaps hiding amongst civilian populations, moving themselves back up north and, taking up arms again and carry out these terrorist attacks against Israeli soldiers. About 500, from what I understand, 500 terrorists taken out by the IDF for round 2 in Jabalia. You had round 2 in even further north, now round 2 in Jabalia, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to see round 2 in other locations in northern and central Gaza as this plays out.
Well, it's not only going back into buildings and specific streets and areas where the IDF operated last time. The IDF, believe it or not, has not destroyed every single building in the Gaza Strip. And so there are areas that they didn't go. So even if they were in Jabalia, it doesn't mean that they were in every building or every area in Jabalia. True. And as such, there are other tunnel shafts, there are other weapons caches that they did not find on the first go-through, and they're going back into these other areas where they didn't operate previously. And this is going to continue to take place because what happens is that once the centralized units, battalions of Hamas are eliminated. When the IDF says they've eliminated a battalion, what that means is 50% of the battalion either killed or injured. What does that mean? It means that there's another 50% of that battalion. And so what happens is the battalion can no longer operate as a unified force, but you still have rogue terrorists. So then they split up. And then they go into different places and they continue their battle, but they're no longer an organized battalion. So some are here, some are there. And there's going to be consistent cleanup operations that are going to take place. And Netanyahu has said that this battle could take place for, at least to the end of the year, if not way beyond, because you still have to take out all these terrorists. You have to find them. There's tunnel shafts everywhere in the Gaza Strip. When it comes to Rafah, I think one of the most shocking discoveries has not just been that there are tunnel shafts and not just been that there are weapons and not just that there are terrorists and that there are hostages, but that they have found at least 20 tunnels that go into Egypt. And in addition to those 20 main tunnels, there's been reported that there's over 80 entrances, shafts that lead into these 20 main tunnels that come up in different places. So this was a very sophisticated smuggling operation that was going under the Egyptian border into Egypt. And now you can understand why from the very beginning of the war, Egypt was against Israel taking over what's called the Philadelphia corridor between Egypt and Gaza, and why they didn't want Israel operating in the area of Rafah to begin with, because it was going to expose Egypt. Egypt beforehand was believed to be an ally of the State of Israel. Security cooperation, a peace deal. Egypt was believed to be an honest broker that could be a negotiator between Israel and Hamas. But now we see very clearly that Egypt has been complicit in the smuggling of weapons and into Gaza, and we don't know how many people, including terrorist leaders, including hostages, may have been smuggled out of the Gaza Strip through these very tunnels. So we see that Egypt has been complicit the entire time, which also makes it a little bit more rich that the Biden administration announcing this deal accepted by Israel and Hamas, supposedly as negotiated by Egypt and Qatar. Qatar is housing the leadership of Hamas there, including Khalid Mashal, Ismail Haniyeh, and others. Egypt complicit with the tunnels and the smuggling operations. These are two essentially arms of Hamas that the United States is negotiating with and putting Israel on the other side of that.
Egypt also, of course, keeping its border closed, not letting any refugees, Arabs, Muslims flee into Egypt, as any other country would in the time of war, number one. And number two, just to show you how things have turned around, Egypt back, I think it was 2015, about a decade ago or so, they actually used to flood some of these smuggling tunnels in order to prevent Hamas and other terror groups from going back and forth, bringing in arms and whatnot. And now you have a situation where it's clear that Egypt has tunnels going from its territory into Rafah, into Gaza, and doing nothing about it, either being lax or just turning a blind eye, or perhaps even enabling these tunnels, weapon smuggling tunnels.
And they're also not facilitating the transfer of humanitarian aid anymore into the Gaza Strip. And why are they doing that? You know, you would think that humanitarian aid, okay, we're going to help the Gazan people over there. We're not letting them come into Egypt, good, but we're gonna make sure that they have food to eat and supplies. No, they want to make it as difficult on Israel as possible. They don't want the humanitarian situation to improve because it's the same part of the strategy. They want Israel to kill as many civilians as possible. They want Israel to create some kind of a famine in Gaza because that further delegitimizes Israel in the eyes of the international community, in the bodies like the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the UN Security Council, and in parliaments around the world. So Egypt really showing its hand very clearly here now as we are 8 months into the war.
Switching gears, turning north, the situation is really out of control. I was just monitoring yesterday on my phone the Red Alert app from northern Israel. Hezbollah nearly around the clock firing rockets and missiles and drones into northern Israel. It's really hot now in Israel, so you have these fires breaking out when a missile lands in an open area. So you even had rockets, missiles being fired at Katsrin, which is basically the capital of the Golan Heights, and it's all day long. It happened yesterday, it happened today. This is nearly an hourly occurrence of these barrages of missiles and rockets and these attempted drone strikes into northern Israel. Israel, of course, striking back in Lebanon, striking back in Syria, taking out terrorists. But again, you have a situation where 60,000 plus Israelis are not in their homes. There's no timetable on when they're going to come home. And it's getting out of control. And we talk about it almost every week, but we're getting closer and closer to when Israel's just going to have to say enough. We cannot withstand hourly rocket attacks. It's unacceptable. And we're going to have to go in, guns blazing.
At this point, the amount of damage that Hezbollah has done in the north is immense.
Metula, Kiryat Shmona, people don't realize that these towns have been devastated.
Completely devastated, and people haven't been killed because they've been evacuated, but the amount of houses and buildings that have been hit in these incessant, nonstop attacks, the damage is very, very serious. It's untenable, and the Israeli response has not met the amount of damage that Hezbollah has done. It has been, to this point, an insufficient response, even as the IDF has been operating in southern Lebanon on an almost daily basis since October 7th, when Hezbollah fired, or shortly after October 7th, when Hezbollah fired the first anti-tank guided missiles and mortars. It is now, as you said, it's happening every hour. The amount of damage is unsustainable. And it is a question of, it's not, we used to think it was not a question of if, but when the IDF was going to go in full force. To watch the IDF Israel absorb the amount of barrage from Hezbollah and to see the response makes you question whether the IDF actually is going to do it. Now, we know that Israel doesn't want to fight on two fronts simultaneously. We know that Israel would prefer that the soldiers that are in the Gaza Strip could be diverted to the north, the tanks that are in the Gaza Strip could be diverted to the north, all the Iron Dome batteries in and around the Gaza envelope could be diverted to the north. We also know that Israel would prefer to wait until this laser system will be fully operational, and it's in testing mode right now, and they're developing it, and they used it a little bit, we saw, from Gaza. Israel certainly would like that to be fully operational, but how long can you wait? When you see the damage that's being done, I think any sane Israeli would say, hey, this has to stop right away, right now, and if you have to fight on two fronts, so be it. That's the situation the state of Israel is in right now.
Two fronts and maybe a third front. This morning you had an attack on the southern coastal city of Eilat, a suspected Houthi missile launched from Iraq, entering or drone or missile or what have you, some sort of weapon and entering Israeli airspace, and Israel took it down this morning. And the Houthis also are firing on U.S. positions over there in the Gulf, and the U.S. seems to, I don't know, they're not taking it seriously, if they don't want to inflame the situation somehow by just letting the Houthis attack their vessels, aircraft carriers and other vessels over there.
The Houthis
in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. I mean, how much can the U.S. put up with this terror organization, of course, affiliated with Iran, another one of the tentacles of the octopus, which is the Iranian regime? How much can the U.S. withstand without responding?
Yeah, the Houthis have been firing at the USS Eisenhower, which is the aircraft carrier that the United States sent over to the area with the beginning of the war. They've attacked the USS destroyer Gravely. They haven't succeeded to down these ships, obviously, because these ships have significant missile defense capabilities on them themselves. I mean, we've seen that over and over again, like the USS John Carney used to shoot down a lot of Houthi missiles directed at Israel and directed at other ships in the Red Sea. But this has also just been nonstop attack, and it's brazen, right? They're basically firing at the U.S. military, and the U.S. military is being held back from retaliating accordingly. You would think there would be other administrations in the past that would say, hey, wait a second, you're a terrorist organization. You're firing directly at our vessels, and you're saying as much. You're not saying it was an accident. You're saying we are targeting these vessels, and they keep attacking at these vessels. I mean, at what point does the United States stop taking that? And other countries in the region, and Iran certainly, is looking at the lack of the U.S. response and saying, hey, they're weak. They're a paper tiger. They are not doing what another administration would do when attacked.
Yeah, I pity those U.S. servicemen who are on these vessels who are just sitting back and being bombarded with these missiles and rockets and just have to, suck it up, I guess, because they're not responding.
I mean, they do have good missile defense capabilities.
For sure.
And you saw the same thing when Iran attacked Israel directly with 300 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. There was an incredible missile defense display by the state of Israel, by the United States and others. It was quite frankly miraculous that it went as successfully as it did, that no planes were downed, that no rockets got through to the extent, or missiles got through to the extent where they did significant damage in Israel. Each one of those missiles could have killed dozens and dozens, or if not hundreds of people, if it would have struck in a population center. The Biden administration said after they fired that Israel should take the victory because of the missile defense.
Right.
That's not a victory. When you get attacked by a sovereign nation, when you get attacked by a terrorist entity, and you just rely on your missile defense and say, you didn't get through, that's not a victory. That you're just inviting future attacks.
It's just the mentality, Alex. The mentality has to change. And we're nearly out of time here. We just want to focus on just one other story. I mentioned it way back in the beginning of the show. Do you even know where the Maldives are? A group of islands. Some are way out and who knows where. Have you heard of the Maldives? Maybe it's not even a story. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about them, but it did make the news, and JNS did cover it, the Maldives. Heard of it? Group of islands. Looks beautiful.
I think that most people don't even know where the state of Israel is on the map.
That's true. But I don't know if I could put my finger on where the Maldives are. But nevertheless, the Maldives is getting themselves involved in the Israel versus Hamas war by deciding to ban all Israelis. If you have an Israeli passport, you can no longer visit the Maldives. I've actually heard of people from here going there saying it's a beautiful place or whatnot. But ironically, the Maldives, which is not allowing Jews/Israelis into their country, into their islands, they are a Muslim nation, And if you are not a Muslim, you are not allowed to have citizenship in the Maldives. And I ask all those college protesters out there who went crazy over the state of Israel, are you going to go out and demonstrate against the Maldives and their policy, number one, not to let Israelis into their country, number one, and number two, not to let non-Muslims be citizens? How dare they do such a thing?
Well, it's the irony here is that, Israel, which is a democratic state, and you have, all the Western European countries, the United Nations, saying that Israel is an apartheid if it doesn't give full citizenship and voting rights to the Palestinians. Israel is the one and only Jewish state in the world. If you take a look at the map of Muslim countries in the Middle East and North Africa, the state of Israel is a tiny speck amidst a gigantic landmass of Muslim-majority countries, of which Israel is just this small dot in the middle. And the idea that Israel would not give citizenship to non-Jews, Israel comes under constant attack from that, and delegitimization and demonization for that. The Maldives, they won't let non-Muslims become citizens. If you look at Japan, they will not let non-Japanese become citizens of Japan. But they expect the state of Israel to destroy itself demographically by giving full citizenship to any Palestinian living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. So we see the double standard, right? As Natan Sharansky talks about the 3 Ds of anti-Semitism, it's delegitimization, demonization, and double standard. So we see it all at play here at the same time.
Yeah, I can smell the hypocrisy all the way from the Maldives, wherever it is. I'm going to go look it up after the show, but unbelievable. The hypocrisy is so great from this tiny island nation way out who decides they're going to also join the parade against the state of Israel.
And we had just on yesterday, you had the parade in New York City for the state of Israel.
For the state of Israel. It looked like there were a lot of people.
45,000 people.
Not bad.
Certainly there were some protesters there, as I think you would expect.
Security was tight, from what I understand.
Yeah, so New York Police Department had doubled the number of police that would have been at that parade in previous years. Certainly, there were those that had, New York is a robust place, and we've seen pro-Hamas protesters, out in New York City for years, even back last time Israel and Gaza flared up in 2021, and it became a very dangerous situation for Jewish residents in the city then. Jewish residents in New York definitely have been seeing an uptick in violent anti-Semitism and worried about their security for this parade, but fortunately, this parade, which featured numerous Israeli politicians, including Foreign Minister Yisrael Katz and other members of Knesset and Jewish community leaders, it went off basically without a hitch, and New Yorkers showed that they stand with the state of Israel, and particularly the Jewish community, strong Jewish community, stands strongly with the state of Israel.
Thank you for your support to the New Yorkers and to the American people, as we said before. But that is all the time we have for this week's episode of Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. Josh Hasten here with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. Shout out to Ryan Lifshitz for everything he does behind the scenes. Without Ryan, there's no show, folks. So make sure you go check out all the great programming on JNS TV. Go to jns.org for all the latest news on Israel and the Middle East, everything you need to know. Thanks so much for joining us. From Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, continue to pray for our brave IDF men and women who are protecting us 24/7. Have a great week, everybody. Be safe.